Hello, hello, my green skins. And today we got ourselves a Val, we got ourselves a Dark, and we got ourselves a true believer moment. Excelsior! What if Stan Lee actually convinced people to do the Power Rangers before anybody else did? So this would be the belief that Stan Lee got people really interested in Power Rangers and was able to do a dubbing equivalent, or this other option will be the option of if they actually did something similar to Power Rangers but kept the story. So we'll start with Val. What do you think about the idea that Stan Lee was actually running around trying to get Power Rangers off the ground?
Uh, well, it's very realistic, and it actually holds some water. Um, I cannot remember her name, but the former head of Fox Kids Entertainment, back when it still existed, she actually helped pitch the idea to the board of directors at Marvel at the time to try and actually bring it forward. She actually believed it. She thought it was entertaining, funny. And if you looked at the Japanese Spider-Man or Spider-Man, uh,
Oh, that
it was very
that
popular in Japan, and he wanted to replicate that success in America. Because if you compare the American shows of Spider-Man, Captain America, they were not doing well. Oh, the Hulk was doing pretty good at the time, but Stan was clearly looking for something more, and Super Sentai clearly seemed to be like the gateway to that. So
what
yeah, I
about
believe that
you,
he
Dark?
totally could have done that.
What do you think about the fact that Stan Lee? Imagine if Power Rangers came first, and then we'll break down. We'll kind of do how our future in the year 2000 future thing happened on this one. So what do you think there, Dark?
What would have happened? Well, the franchise would have got a different trajectory. It would have been an accurate translation, and from what I understand, all the Super Sentai shows are connected. So we probably he probably would have started out with the original series because I think Mighty Morphin is kind of like is probably the fifth or sixth series.
Yeah, I
No, it's
So
think.
actually it's the 16th.
oh,
Holy
I'm
shit!
I'm way off.
Yeah,
Okay,
the series started in the mid 70s, following Kamen Rider, which started
Yeah,
in 71.
yeah, and then they were 76 if I remember correctly.
Yeah, a couple of years after the original Kamen Rider and the immediate sequels.
Yeah, I have seen some of the original Super Sentai. I think that's the one where they got the kid, where the aliens are trying to kidnap kids, and all the Super Sentai actually carry around katana swords to cut, and they're like fucking actually attacking people with swords, and there's some blood and shit. I vaguely remember something. I just can't remember. I saw it so long ago. My brain doesn't fundamentally. It's like seeing something and you've never seen it again. So I'm not 100% sure what I saw. So
Yeah, the only thing that I can say about that, like the first series, at least as far as I can remember, they had the basic primary colors, and
mhm,
they all had like a symbol of like a that you'd see in like a suit of cards, you know, like a deck of cards kind of thing, a
mhm.
spade, heart, uh, diamond, club kind of thing.
I couldn't tell you even if my like it's that crazy. And Power Rangers fundamentally changed as time went on, and the Super Sentai did. So our trajectory is that Stan Lee got people to take this. Now, my thing is because like we haven't really gotten other people's, but I'll shoot this because I figure I'm probably the second most coveted on this because I know a lot about Common Rider as well. I honestly believe that this would have been a more adult and a more mature version of Super because the Super Sentai were a lot more mature than the kid versions we got. Like we didn't have those bulk and skull moments, and I remember, if I vaguely remember, people died in the Super Sentais originally. Like there was body count.
Oh yeah, yeah. Main characters either died or got severely beaten up. their loved ones were put on the lifelines or dying. Like,
Yeah.
there was actually a trope for a period of time when the Sixth Ranger would pop up. There was a real chance that they could end up dead. Hell, the Green Ranger, the original Green Ranger, from what we would call Power Rangers, was called a Jew Ranger. That character died.
Yeah. And it's sad. It's sad to say that it's speaking about the Green Ranger. We lost. We just lost the actual the Mighty Morphin equivalent to that. One of the one of the most well known Power Rangers, David. And it's sad to see that guy sort of had what happened to him. And well, what ended up happening. So my condolences to everybody that's feels about that character. And so it's the one thing is certain about it. I don't think it wouldn't have went Valley's 90 actually. Like I think, especially if they had decided to do the series back then in the 80s, I think they would have followed the story far more. And again, OG Power Rangers not only is it a little bit more violent, it's also a little bit more sexual than other Power Rangers.
Yeah, absolutely. Innuendos abound. The outfits themselves speak for themselves, and we're not even going to talk about the borderline M rating of the shows.
Yeah, well, they never had a borderline M rating. I would say they were more T. It's kind of like saying Sailor. What if we had gotten uncut Sailor Moon? Because if I remember correctly, uncut Sailor Moon, from what I've heard, had a little bit more sexuality to it, which I don't know if that's true or not. I've heard the same thing about uncut Card Captor Sakura, and I don't know. To my knowledge, that was the show I put on when I had to babysit my godkids. So I don't know how truthful that is at all, but to my knowledge, they didn't. But
yeah, Card Captor Sakura, probably not. Sailor Moon, oh, I can definitely see it, especially since the fact that two of the Sailor Scouts, who are cousins in the English dub, are actually lesbian lovers in the original dub.
Yeah, we won't get into all that because that could be.
No.
Yeah, well, we'll be at that. We'll be at this forever. And the thing is I think this trajectory would be so fascinating because, one, I don't think we would have got the Valley Power Rangers. Now that's the question, Dark, because here in effect, like I said, you're kind of the freshie on this one. I think you'll have a lot better what ifs when we do the next one coming up. What do you think would have happened if we had gotten a way earlier version? Do you think it would have been as popular, the more adult either subbed or a more adult version of Power Rangers? Do you think it would have worked in America?
That is hard to say, considering I don't live in America. But when you look at what was coming from Japan at the time and how much they had to be localized, probably not. I mean, I think, from what I understand, people even complained that Power Rangers was violent enough as it is, and it was toned down for the American market. So I think
It really was. It's kind of funny how I heard that too. Same thing about Naruto. I heard the same thing about, like, again, these weren't Fists of the North Star. This wasn't like some of the stuff that was existing that came through, that was already here in America at the time.
But they were
for
niche.
Power Rangers.
Like, if you wanted to watch Fist of the North Star in America, you had to really be into anime. You had to. This was like an underground thing. You couldn't just.
No, it wasn't. Well, I would say Fist was popular enough that you could find it, and you could say the same thing about some of the sports animes that were coming out at the time. So I could say, I'd say no to that, but question mark. I would say that
maybe
Go ahead.
obviously, to bring this to America, as with anything, it would have to be franchised, i.e., toys. So I think Power Rangers did have toys, but I think Marvel would have pushed for more merchandise.
Oh, it would have blown up. Oh yeah, they are. Well, okay, not including what happened with Disney shit that happened. Marvel has always sold toys. This is a misconception that people believe that Marvel hadn't. Fucking, are you high? Is my response to that, because Marvel was notorious for that, and we had companies at the time that were doing Power Ranger toys. A buddy of mine's got a bunch of them because he lived in Japan when he was a kid, and he's got a bunch of Kamen Rider, and they're cool fucking toys. I still make the joke that if you want to be a true badass, go into Yu-Gi-Oh carrying the gun deck holder. Like screw the Yu-Gi-Oh disc holder for holding your cards. You want to be a real badass? Walk in with the deck holder from fucking from Gundam from Kamen Rider Blade or Kamen Rider, the deck holders for those things, which have a life bar system too. So
Yeah, I've encountered people who are who like to point fingers at certain franchises they don't like for being merchandise driven, whereas we know Marvel is just as much of a, well, especially at that time, a toy advertisement machine.
okay, great example. This is Ben 10 from that perspective. I mean, 8 billion fucking dollars in toys. 8 billion a billion with a B in merchandise, and that's just like some of that's just the original Ben 10, not including the other shit that they came out with. Like, you wonder why they relaunched Ben 10? That's why. And people are like, well, it's too commercial. I'm like, well, yeah, that's how companies work. Like shit. Um, like, I think personally, on a lot of levels, we can't deny that the original Mighty Morphin Power Rangers helped make Super Sentai something in other countries. I don't think people would have known, personally. But the ultimate question was, and Val, I'm going to ask you the same question. Do you think that it would have took off, Super Sentai would have took off in America like Mighty Morphin did? Val?
Um, I'm actually not sure. I mean, I'm fairly certain it would have had that Marvel flair, and it definitely would have had some kind of an impact, but it would not have been the explosion it did back in the 90s. Because if you look at the early 90s when Power Rangers came out, it was happening in the second, I think, what I would like to call the second phase of Saturday morning cartoons,
Mm.
where in the 80s you had toys and then a show, and the show was acting as an advertisement for the toys, and the toys were what was going to make the money.
No, that
Where when you
they
get to
they
the
they go ahead.
when you get to the 90s, however, the toys end up funding the show. Or
Not
they're like,
true. Not true. You could Cadillacs and Dinosaurs is a good example of that. Shows the shows, unfortunately, marketing to kids and not marketing to kids. Remember, they stopped the whole not marketing to kids at a certain point. There was a point in the 80s where you couldn't market to kids. And then there's a point in the 90s where you could market to kids. Now remember, there's never ever been an actual X-Men. If I vaguely remember, there was never a true X-Men based off the X-Men TV show toy line. It was fundamentally based off a previous toy line that existed. Unlike the Spider-Man, which did have a fundamental toy line. So there was a period when you couldn't do toy lines like that. And there's a period where you couldn't sell to kids. I believe it was in the 80s where that happened, and then it kind of stopped around the 90s, and then it started up again. It's on and off.
I don't know what
Like
you're
there's
talking about. I saw plenty of X-Men toys on shelves with the logo of the TVs of the show, screenshots from the actual cartoon.
Well,
And
those had to have been those had to have been replicas. I could be wrong. Again, I could be wrong, but I don't ever remember seeing a morph toy back in the day, or did I see a Sentinel ever get sold back in the day? But I saw Shadowcat pop up. Again, this could be, like I said, there was already an X-Men toy. For those that don't know, there was an X-Men toy line already out before the show even came out. There was a Captain America toy line already out. So it wasn't until I didn't see an actual thing until after the show was done. I didn't see X-Men toys based off the show. Now maybe that just could have been my area, but I vaguely remember no comic book store doing that.
I mean, I've seen throughout the '90s, I've seen toys for Beast Wars, obviously, Gargoyles, the Mighty Ducks, Street Sharks.
Yeah, but for X-Men, it wasn't the same thing. And then, again, that's what I'm saying. For that period in the 80s, you weren't supposed to. This is why shows like He-Man, shows like G.I. Joe, shows like Transformers, they all kind of got crapped on for a bit. Oh, you couldn't do it with the toy line in thought.
No, that's
So they
actually
had
not
to.
true. You're thinking of everything prior to 1982.
Am I?
1982 is the end of that whole kids are not allowed to be advertised to mentality.
I thought that didn't get fully reinvented until 1987. But we're getting off topic here, boys. Now we were asking you, Val, about do you think this would have come out? Now the next big question was, do you guys think that they could have done a more adult version of Power Rangers? Like they talk about it, and we had the guy, the unfortunate, the guy who did the Green Ranger had a trailer for a comic book series that was out there, which really sucked because I wanted to see that adult version of the comic book. I love that. Then when I saw that, I was like, "Fuck yeah, I want to see that show." So we have had these cool like moments, but would a more adult version of Power Rangers worked in the 90s? Because that let's say they, Stan Lee went with his idea of doing a complete show, like buying everything and doing an actual show up here. Do you think up in the Americans?
Well, what do you mean by would it have worked? Do you mean would it have been put together well, or would it have been successful?
No. Would have been successful. We're
No.
looking at success.
No.
No?
I'll tell you this. As I told you, parents complained at even the mildest amount of violence. Look at Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, the first movie. The reason the second movie and especially the third movie turned out the way they were is because some piece of shit moms and dads who can't raise their kids had to throw a bitch fest at the use of nunchucks. Hell, the UK had a problem with Michelangelo using nunchucks, and the word
again. I've said it once and I'll say it again. Karens have existed forever. Have existed for all history. We need to just understand that happens. And that we just, when we've created one, they need to be not listened to, because, won't someone please think of the children? Like Helen Lovejoy is a great example of this, and it's Simpson. I'm going to use the Simpson evaluation because that's a perfect way to do it. You will run into these people who don't care, and are just trying to be offended, and they have to be offended. They have to hate it. And I think that's what they would have done with Power Rangers. They did the same thing with Pokemon. There's the Pokemon Scare, the Satanic Panic, which created a movie called Mazes and Monsters, which will be a future review.
But there was also Married with Children got someone complaining about it, and that show wasn't even aimed for kids. But they used the think of the children excuse.
They do, and this has always existed. They've always existed. We just need to ignore them. Like history has proven, when we ignore the Karen, it works. Society's better for it. A great example of this is when people finally said "fuck you" to Prohibition. Look what happened when Prohibition existed. Look what happened after Prohibition was initiated, and the high levels of crime. Just fucking saying. But I don't know. What do you think, Val? Do you think there would have been that mother outcry? Oh my God, think of the children. Do you think it would have just burned out and it would have failed?
Uh, I don't know. We're looking at the era where that's a really muddy water because even if they were these mother groups went ahead and started fighting about it, Stan Lee probably would have pushed back because he remembered the days of the Comics Code.
You read his notes to fans. If you ever want to know the type of person Stanley was, read his notes to fans. If those are real, if those are actually his writings, there's been some talk that they're not. If those are actually his writings, he had a very honest way of looking at shit. And he just basically, he didn't never told anyone to fuck off, but you get that fuck off vibe when you read some of his writings to people.
Mm-hmm.
And he was quite prolific at saying, I I don't care. And a lot of guys, they needed that because like you spend days, months, years working on something, and to have someone try to bury you. And Marvel there was multiple times Marvel was attempted to be buried. The edginess of Marvel, the idea of making Iron Man an alcoholic, for example, was a huge thing. And kids paid attention. Um,
Well,
some of that edginess didn't work,
that's because little
but
kids was not usually his main audience. He he was going for teenagers and up, people old enough to understand uh, smoking and drinking.
And drug use and
yeah,
stuff
And
like that.
drug
yeah,
use. Yeah, it got it got over the hill sometimes. Like there's some insane stuff for Marvel, but I would say this. I would say the Power Rangers that we got, the Mighty Morphin. On my final word on this, the Power Rangers that came out was a perfect time and a perfect storm. It wasn't awful enough that it could get people upset, but it wasn't good enough to for most grown adults. We look at the Power Rangers now. I've had people say this to me on multiple occasions. I think the Power Rangers is so campy, but it's better than what half the other shit that's coming out now is.
Well, hey,
And go ahead.
sorry. Yeah, I totally agree. Sorry. Yeah, I totally agree. Power Rangers right now. Uh, sorry. Power Rangers back then, maybe campy now, but it has an enduring kind of campiness about it. It's like a time capsule of that era, but it also tends to say, you know what? You look down underneath the surface, it's still got a pretty darn good story. Could it have been more mature? Yes.
Yeah. And
Could it
again,
have,
we had yeah.
could
And
it have followed
it,
everything like to the letter? Yeah.
yeah. So it had its moments, it had its peak, and it's not a horrible series. Um, like I said, it also we took the image of the White Ranger and the two White Rangers and had a comparison. The thing is that yes, they did kids. Like a lot of people would. I heard this a lot. Oh, they would never do that in the original Power Rangers. They wouldn't have a little kid play. Yes, they did. So
Several times, I might add.
yeah, they've done it a couple times, and they also had an overweight guy be a Power Ranger, which is kind of fucking hysterical in later Power Rangers. It's an overweight white guy who's an ancient barbarian caveman or something like that. It's fucking funny. Super Sentai's been nuts over the years, and I think it works for both of them. Like a series that's the unofficial Sentai. Uh, there's an unofficial Sentai out there that kind of says it both. Both have their places. Some people disagree, but I like both equally. I like both Power Rangers equally, the original and the other one. So yeah, and that's kind of the way I look at it. It's both good. And on that note, unless anybody else has anything else to add, thank you. Please like, subscribe. And we will see you on the next What If.